thank you for joining us for this exciting webinar with Tricentis, which we have been planning for a very long time. My name is Nav Singh. I lead the marketing and communications here at DXC Technology for the banking and capital markets vertical. The IT landscape of typical large financial services company and also building societies has become so complex, as we know. At least no human can completely understand the impact of change on an end-to-end environment. At the same time, the price of failure from poorly implemented change has never been so high either. Outages impact brand, customers, and colleagues, and are a major concern to regulators focused on operational resilience. Into this complexity gap are stepping new generations of artificial intelligence that have proven very capable of recommending appropriate testing and even writing them for you. The result in testing that is both more effective and efficient for banks and building societies. AI, as we know, is already predicted to transform software development, marketing, research, and many other areas of our everyday life. So why not testing? To answer this question and more, I'm joined today by distinguished guests on the virtual panel. Please welcome David Rimmer, Managing Partner, Banking and Capital Markets at DXC Technology. We've got David Corwell, VP of Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning at Tricentis. We've got Nadia Snezko, Director of Global Head of QA Automation at DXC Luxoft. And we've got Roger Smith, Global Leader Testing and Digital Assurance at DXC Technology. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today. Now, before we begin, may I ask that if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box. There will be an opportunity to have those questions answered at the end. The session is also recorded, and a recording will be available to everyone after this webinar. So first and foremost, David Rimmer, if I may come to you firstly, thank you for joining us. I know you've been very, very attuned to testing and AI. You've eloquently written about AI. We were both at the recent banking event at Deutsche Bank in Frankfurt and many others. Can you please start off by showcasing any challenges that financial services companies are facing when it comes to testing, specifically whilst doing any regulations or compliance?
Yeah, so now when you asked me to introduce this webinar, what came into my mind was a weekend about 6 or 7 years ago that I think was one of the most stressful weekends I've ever had in my professional career. And what we were doing there was taking a core banking system live in the cloud. So it's a massive cutover. And the reason why it was so stressful was because we knew that the costs of failure were immense. You know, the impact on our customer, on their customer's customer, on our own reputation was enormous if we got it wrong. And at the same time, the regulator was taking a deep interest in this because this was actually the first implementation on a private cloud in the UK. And what made the whole undertaking so stressful was the complexity of the underlying systems. Although I sort of talked about taking a core banking system live, in reality, this was a whole set of systems, the core system, but all the surrounding peripheral systems. They'd been developed over many years. And although we'd done a lot to refactor the code, it was still inherently just very, very complicated with lots of interconnections between the various systems, as I'm sure everybody's familiar with. At the same time, you know, we had this weekend and one other weekend if as a fallback, and after that, we'd have to move back 4 months before we'd actually next have a window to do the cutover, and the customer was backing up change around this. So huge implications for us and our customers if this went wrong. Now, I guess you're all sort of wondering, how did the story turn out? Well, guess what? It all went well, and you know I'm still standing. But the point is that this was a huge effort. And although we used the testing tools of the day, it was still very manually intensive. It was very costly, and there was an awful lot more uncertainty and jeopardy around the situation than I would have liked and I felt comfortable with. So, and that brings me to today's webinar. And I really think that when you look at today's tools and approaches to testing and where we're coming in terms of artificial intelligence, that we really are moving to a very different level of assurance and cost and speed around testing. And as we all know, testing is very much, can be a bottleneck in terms of the development for banks and the whole time to market issue, with very limited windows. So that's why I'm very keen to hear more from, and I hope you are, from Roger and Nadia and David, around how AI can make a difference here, particularly through automation, through understanding where to automate, to understand what will have changed, and to focus those testing efforts and thereby reduce costs, increase the accuracy and the trust in the outcomes of testing, and also to get stuff done within the very narrow windows that typically one has for testing. Now, as with any kind of financial services ad, we need to provide the health warning. So I just want to say something about AI. And clearly there's an awful lot of buzz about AI, but at the same time, there's a certain amount of uncertainty because we're getting into slightly uncharted territory here. And the key thing is that in a number of jurisdictions, there is specific regulation coming up around AI. There's also a lot of consultation for instance, in the UK and in the EU around banking specific regulation. And then on top of that, you still have the fact that general law still applies to AI, GDPR still applies. And then there are also bank policies and so on. And so in any use of AI, even something indirectly, not directly customer facing, such as testing, it's so important to have a line of sight back to those regulations and policies and so on, so that one not just knows that what one's doing is compliant, but one can demonstrate that one definitely is compliant. So that transparency and line of sight back to those rules is of critical importance. But at the same time, we can't sort of imagine that AI, which is such a transformational technology, is not going to have a major impact on testing, that it doesn't offer a huge amount of opportunity. So the health warning is not that we can't be doing this, we shouldn't be doing this. It's just about having that line of sight back to those rules and regulations, and then embracing the technology, but within those kind of guardrails, as it were. So that's it. Now I'll hand it back to you, and then on to the other panelists.
Thank you very much, David Rimmer over there. Interesting, you mentioned about regulations, and which brings me to ask that question of, with those challenges, David Colwell, thank you for joining us. I know it's very late for you where you are, so thank you for your time. If you can delve a little bit more around, specifically from a Tricentis viewpoint, what are the solutions for some of those challenges that David mentioned, and more specifically with some of our audience, consisting of building societies and credit unions?
Thanks, Nav. Hopefully the accent isn't too hard for all of you to guess. I'm from down under. It's just gone midnight, so thankfully all of the children are asleep. I'm going to pick up the thread of how AI can help solve some of these challenges that Dave Rimmer just outlined. But before that, I might do a very brief dive into why we're talking about generative AI now. Because artificial intelligence is not new. Neural networks themselves are not new. The first neural networks were invented back in the 1950s. So what is it about generative AI that's causing all of this buzz? What's causing so much fuss, and why has it got some people very excited and some people very worried? Well, generative AI is a new form of artificial intelligence. Whereas before, AI had to learn by having very specific and discrete data created that could only answer very narrow questions, like specifically looking at a customer's credit history and answering the credit risk of that customer, or profiling people into risk categories. These are things called regression networks. Generative AIs, or specifically in this case, large language models, such as what you see in the news in ChatGPT, learned by reading the sum total of human creation, reading the books that we wrote, the articles that we created. It's probably already read the articles that Dave Rimmer wrote a couple of weeks ago. And this gave it an immense understanding of human knowledge and human language. And it started to seem like it had intelligence. And these networks are huge. They are hundreds of billions of parameters, or put in terms of the power consumption, it's estimated by 2027 that AI servers could use about the same amount of power as Argentina. They're also seemingly quite smart. They're acing exams like the SATs, they've got their MBA, and for some reason they're capable of passing the sommelier exam. We're still trying to figure out exactly how that happened. Maybe the exam needs a bit of a rework. And when you look at the banking and finance industry specifically, and the building societies, we've done surveys along with Gartner and Forrester industry leading groups, and found that about 68% of all of these organizations are looking at implementing AI specifically within their DevOps or development practices. And that's covering development, testing, business analysis, and requirements gathering and generation. And the leading area out of all of those that people are looking to use this new hyper-intelligent generative AI is in the area of testing. And so we've been doing a lot of research into, well, within that area of testing, what value can you get out of a generative AI? Because what you have at your fingertips is something that is able to understand human knowledge and to understand the language that you've written and to give you responses to natural questions. And requirements, or Jira tickets or whatever form you use, are a form of natural question. It's a statement about the state that you want your application to end up in. And so we've seen, and we've actually built products that enable customers to have the AI read their requirements and write the tests for you, or read requirements and build automated scenarios or scripts. And we've also seen it help in the area of focusing your efforts and filtering out the noise, because these AIs with their massive artificial brains and seemingly limitless ability to crunch data are exceptionally good at consuming that large volume of organizational knowledge that we've all generated over time. And they can focus in and tell you which parts of that are relevant to a specific testing task. When you're talking about huge projects that are spanning many systems and they're spanning multiple different, perhaps even months or years worth of work, being able to draw those strands together and present them at the face is exceptionally powerful. And it leans heavily into something that we as humans are very good at. We're very good at judging, at looking at options and saying, this one is better than that one, this is the way to go, and this is the way not to. We're not very good at crunching large volumes of data. In fact, Miller's law from 1956 says that we're only good at holding about 7 things plus or minus 2 in our memory at any point in time. So these AIs are good at reading requirements and writing tests. They're good at crunching the organizational knowledge and delivering focus. They're very good at identifying gaps and increasing coverage, so finding things that lie between requirements. And they're very good at looking at failures and saying, well, looking at the particular failure that you've had, I've seen similar ones across the different places in the industry. And here is some root causes that are common. And there's banks that we've worked with that are using internally trained AIs or AIs from us and achieving massive gains. According to some of our industry partners, the numbers not from us, we're finding them being up to 6 times faster writing tests, and the speed up that they're getting out of generative AI co-pilots writing code is immense. It's up to an 80% reduction in coding time, although that does vary depending on the complexity and the volume of the coding that you have to do. So we've got this very interesting coalescence of a technical opportunity in something that is now exceptionally powerful and trained on human knowledge and able to interact with us in the language that we speak, and something that is proven to provide great business value and exceptional results. This seems like, sweet, we're off, we're done, AI is going to take over. But not quite, because it's not all happy days when it comes to generative AI. There are some very significant challenges. I'm going to start with picking up the thread that Dave just talked about, thread of regulatory decision-making, data privacy. This is an immense problem when it comes to artificial intelligence. When you train an artificial intelligence, and that is when you give it new knowledge and you expect it to pick that knowledge up and learn it and then start responding back to you, it's very similar to when you train a person, when you expose knowledge to them. It's similar in how it works, as in you say, hey, here's some new information, and they absorb it, and they're able to then, after probably a few times of being exposed to it, they now know it. But it's also similar in that you can't unlearn something. It's like that old proverb of don't think about the pink elephant. But when you tell an AI something, it doesn't forget. Its memory may sort of degrade over time if you continue to update and train it, but that knowledge is kind of in there forever. And there's been several examples of organizations that have had problems with this. I think the most high profile one was Samsung, where their teams were using the publicly available ChatGPT interface, and they were using it with examples from internal code, and it was giving them really good benefits. So they were in that sort of, coding much faster category. But they were training the artificial intelligence, because according to the terms of OpenAI, anything you put into that interface, they can use for training. And so people started to notice that you could get the AI to give you samples of Samsung code because it had learned that code when someone provided us an example. So you have to be very careful when you're using artificial intelligence or when you're embarking on this journey about the data that you train it with and where that data is stored, how the model, which is the thing that is trained, is located, and whether you have the ability to be forgotten or to have that model deleted so that your knowledge is no longer resident in the artificial intelligence. And the way that we do it inside Tricentis is if a customer or a client's data is trained into an artificial intelligence, it's not trained into the common model, it's trained into separate models so that you can delete those models and say, right, that's gone, that customer's knowledge is now forgotten. So you have to treat these models the same way you treat any other sensitive data, in that they're highly sensitive and you treat them as a security risk. In addition, there's a concept called algorithmic transparency, which means that if you're using these models to do something that would be a regulated activity, this could be selecting which test cases belong in a test suite. It could be determining what test cases need to be written for a given requirement. Or if you're using or testing artificial intelligence that's been implemented in a customer or a citizen-facing system, then it's almost anything, because all of those interactions with citizens and customers are subject to different regulation, GDPR being the most aggressive of them. And under these algorithmic transparency laws, you have to be able to explain why a decision was made, not just that a decision was made. And unfortunately, we can't pull like Kath and Kim and say computer says no. You have to say there's a reason for it, this is the reason. And the decisions of the artificial intelligence are systemic decisions. They need to be owned by your organizations. And there are some countries that are actually banning or severely limiting the use of generative AI, Italy being the foremost among them, which are banned. I think it may be reinstated now, but for a long time it banned the use of OpenAI and ChatGPT within its borders. So it's got regulatory challenges, and it also has a problem with hallucinating, which sounds a little bit odd to say, but these artificial intelligences, we like to think of them as overactive interns. They're very quick at giving you answers. They're on the point, they work hard, and they read what you say and they try to immediately give you a response to that. And they don't know when they don't know. They will always answer. So they're always confident and mostly correct is the best way of thinking about them. If you asked, for example, our premier product is a product called Tosca. It's a great automation product. It's model-based, so you don't need to be a coder to be able to use it. So we asked the generative AI about Tosca script, which doesn't exist. There is no scripting language for Tosca. The generative AI not only extolled the benefits of ToscaScript in such a way as to make the marketing team shamed by how good it was, but it then went to give us a whole syntax and examples of ToscaScript. And by the end of it, I was almost convinced, even though I knew this didn't exist, that it did, because I thought, how could it have gotten this so much detail? It was making the whole thing up. And this really is the primary limitation that organizations are facing when it comes to generative AI, is it has an exceptional ability. Like I said, you can get 6 times faster at getting tests done. It has a great amount of power and processing ability, and it's a revolutionary new technology that will fundamentally change the way we do testing. But it is not out there doing testing without us. It is not ready to be released without human supervision. And the reason for that is because of that regulatory transparency, the need to be able to explain the algorithm. It's because of the limitations in using it and training it on internal system data. And it's because it lies, and a human needs to be responsible for the outputs of that. So it's not ready to be used without human supervision, but with human supervision or human in the loop artificial intelligence, financial organizations are seeing massive benefits amongst this. There's a bank, actually, like I said, ANZ Down Under in Australia, who's published a lot of their findings already out there on LinkedIn. And they're seeing that when you keep the training data in-house and you're careful with your model location, you're training it on internal information, it's able to almost index your whole organization. It can help you write massively better tests. It can help you identify those gaps. It can help you find that coverage, and it can help you identify root causes. In short, it can help you deliver extremely complex programs of work while mitigating the risk that comes along with that. So we as humans, great at judgment, bad at data. AI, terrible at judgment, amazing at data. This match is pretty much made in heaven, and the overlap of the two has already proven to be exceptionally powerful. And Nav, I might hand over back to you now for a few thoughts.
David, thanks for that. Please do feel free, audience, to write your questions in the chat box as this panelists are going. David, if I may have you back on screen, please, because my question to you was in regards to when you were saying, AI works alongside the humans. How about scenario mapping? So that's one thing that I'm sure we'll go on to Roger and Nadia in the next segment, but I want to touch base on scenario mapping, because sometimes are there any insights how accurate scenario mapping may be, and does it still need involvement of humans?
So mapping scenarios, or I assume you're talking about test scenarios back to things like requirements and code changes, etc. It's very good at identifying connections between these disparate things. So exceptionally good at linking code to scenarios that may impact that code, and scenarios themselves through to requirements that are possibly addressed by it, or segments within your requirements documentation, Jira or internal docs, that you may need to be able to do to provide that mapping. However, it can, it has a bit of a spurious correlation problem going on, that it reads through the test scenario that you've written, and sometimes if you're too detailed in the test scenario, it doesn't quite know what the focus of the scenario is. So for example, if you've got, you're trying to create a new set of transactions on the Swift system, and you've got a lot of setup in the test case that's talking about how you're going to manage the to account and the from account and the balance, etc. But the point of the test case is right there at the end, where it says, and now validate that when I did an international transfer, it correctly converted the foreign currencies. It'll pick up all of that. So we'll link it to the requirements that are about foreign currency conversion, but it will also link it to all the things about identifying to accounts and Swift systems and from accounts, etc. So it's a good way of going from this could connect to anything to this could connect to one of these things, but it is still very much best used if you've got a person to go, that's the connection I was after. That's the one right there.
Great, David. Thank you very much for that. That leads on nicely to my next part, where I would like to invite Roger and Nadia to come on screen, please. So thank you, Roger and Nadia. Considering what David Colwell and earlier what David Rimmer said, can you elaborate on any areas where we're seeing this payoff, and importantly, how we're seeing this payoff specifically in financial services?
Yep, sure, absolutely. And maybe I'll start out. So maybe I'll start with the fact that I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum from Mr. David Colwell, who's in Australia. I'm located in the U.S. on the East Coast. So here we're still drinking coffee and the kids are just waking up. But I think overall, thanks folks for taking the time today. I think this is a really timely topic. As David mentioned, AI has been around for a while, right? But testing has really been an early adopter of AI. And frankly, I kind of look at it, I think it's funny to say it this way, the traditional use of AI in testing, right, versus kind of newer uses of AI in testing, right, that are opened up through large language models, right, and generative AI that David talked about. AI has been used for a while, but why? And getting back to what David Rimmer talked about earlier in terms of banking and some of the challenges, right, AI helps us solve some problems. Right, so when I talk to our customers in the banking sector, right, but also other sectors as well, right, around testing and some of their key challenges, two things that come up as kind of all the time in terms of their challenges. Number one is time. Time is the number one challenge that our customers have when it comes to testing, and the reason for that is because because of the application teams are under a lot of pressure from the business to deliver new applications and new application features a lot faster than they have ever before. So not to date myself, right, but I recall when application releases would happen quarterly, annually, semi-annually, et cetera. Now, on average, it's weekly, often daily. Sometimes for customers, it's multiple times a day. One customer I was speaking with just a few weeks ago, right, generally today they do about 50 new application releases a week across a small portfolio of applications, but they're being pushed by the business to release, to extend that to more than 100 releases a week. Right, so that's a lot of pressure on the applications teams, and testing often, especially traditional testing, right, it can be a long pull in the tent. It can have a hard time keeping pace, right, with the demands from the business on applications, right? So time kind of being one of the key issues. The second one is cost. So testing typically, right, is 20%, 30% or more of the application's budget. So a large part of the budget overall, and a lot of our customers are under intense pressures, right, to reduce costs, budget constraints, et cetera. And so if you think about those two things, those two key challenges, right, automation overall addresses both of those challenges, right? And then AI can really enhance automation, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a bit. But Nadia, before we go into that, can you talk a little bit more about some of the unique needs for testing and banking in the banking industry? Maybe give an example of how we help the customer.
Of course, thank you, Roger. And to mirror you, I will also talk about the two big things that would be specific and differentiate banking as an industry and that have an actual material impact on how we approach testing for banking. And the first one is the thing that we've been talking on for a good 30 minutes already, are the strict regulations that exist in the space and the new regulations that are appearing every year that all of the banks need to adhere to, or they would be facing fines. And the second big thing is a mix of technologies that we are talking about when we talk about banking. Every bank is a large and a complex ecosystem of platforms and frameworks, some of which could have dated decades ago and been built in a legacy technology that is no longer maintained and supported. And all of that needs to be integrated with innovative and modern solutions that are being integrated and put into the implementation now. So for addressing the regulatory change for testing, shift left is critical, because here we need to make sure that testing professionals are involved at the very beginning, at the requirement specification phase, to be able to interpret business and technical requirements early on. And also a very important thing is to do the estimations early. Because sometimes a very small regulatory change can imply a lot of testing, like we have seen with MiFID, when we needed to test a lot of instruments being traded for investment banking, and it was just like one change for voice trades, but it impacts all of the instruments. So you have to build a huge test pack for it. Also, the change is not that significant as it sounds. For the complexity of testing, it's very important to have the holistic view and the testing strategy that you implement, especially when you have those legacy platforms in the mix. And this is where the modern tools and modern technologies like Tricentis solutions come into play, because the very best approach to address the test automation is to cover the end-to-end test automation. And that's where the no-code automation tools that are technology agnostic can allow you to cover both innovative new tech and the legacy tech stacks that exist in the banking ecosystem. And here, I would like to zoom in into one of the examples, particular example where we were using Tosca for functional test automation for one of our clients. So the client was one of the banks based in Asia Pacific. And around 2 years ago, this client approached us with a specific challenge. They were in process of implementing a new core banking platform and were looking for a partner to validate it. But also at the same time, they were looking to improve the overall quality of their banking products, because at that time they haven't had any consolidated testing strategy and defined processes. And as a result of that, had a whole bunch of issues that are very typical for the clients in banking space, such as they had majorly manual testing approach being used for testing, and because of that, they were not able to handle the increasing scope of testing and new features implemented. They also had isolated environments and processes, no DevOps practices whatsoever, and all of that was leading to outages, blockers, and ultimately at the end, increasing cost of development and cost of testing. So the approach that we have taken was to tackle the specific testing needs for the new platform, but at the same time to build a center of excellence for this client, defining all of the aspects that are implied for the quality assurance space, and also incorporating a process of continuous improvement for the testing approach in future. The main target when we started for this client was to standardize the environment policy, to establish proper pipeline management and DevOps practices, because these are the crucial enabler for test automation benefits, and also incorporate this test automation as a high priority for functional validation and regression testing to save time and decrease costs. Also, one of the points for Center of Excellence was the definition of target maturity state, both in testing and in DevOps space, and preparing the roadmap for the client to follow to reach this maturity state that they were putting as a target for them. For the automation approach here, we started, of course, with validation for the system under test, so the new platforms that was being implemented. But eventually, we started to expand as well to upstream and downstream system to cover the true end-to-end business flow. And I would like to highlight here how important it is to be able to cover the flows themselves, the actual user steps, the business flow, and the scenarios that are ultimately what the platform is being used for. Because this way you can be very transparent in terms of your coverage and your particular automation coverage, as it would speak to the business themselves and to their risks, rather than just having an isolated area checked, but never validating the full flow. In a year, we have grown the team there at the client side from 10 people up to 40 people, have reached the functional test coverage of over 60%. And as it started to stabilize, we are now switching to definition and implementation of some other types of testing and test automation, specifically in the non-functional areas. In particular, this is for performance test automation. So we are now working on definition of the performance automation strategy and selecting and identifying the proper tools to implement test automation for this space. So testing includes a lot of types and levels. Roger, do you think that there is anything else that this particular customer can benefit from and consider in future in terms of the test automation? And overall, what should customers be focused on when they speak about test automation? If we have covered the functional and performance, what else is there? What else is the improvement you would suggest?
Yeah, thanks, Nadia. And I think one thing to point out that you mentioned as well, I mean, automation, right? We've talked a lot about automation, how AI helps automation, right? But the other things you mentioned, shifting left, right? And thinking about what you're automating and looking at end-to-end scenarios, right? That really represent what the business users are going to do with the system is really important. So I'm really glad you called those out. I think something else for folks to consider when they're thinking about automation, AI, and heading down this path. But if I focus on automation just a second, right? Automation, it's an investment. So if you think about it, when you're automating your testing, and when you're automating anything, right, you're investing in time, right? It takes people, it takes time, labor to develop, to build those automations, right? And then once you've built them, right, it takes effort and people, right, to manage those automations, right, once they're in production. It takes technology, there's software, there's the technology needed to host it, right? There's other costs around it, right? So I think it's important that we think about automation as an investment. And then thinking about how we maximize the return on that investment as well. And a couple of things to consider. Number one, as you're starting out, it's really important that you pick the right things to automate first, right? To make sure that you're going to get the good return on that investment up front, the benefits that you're looking to achieve with that automation up front, right? To help support the program as you kind of automate more in the future, right? It's really important to pick the right things, especially at first. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. Certainly the frequency, right, of how often that testing, right, or that test case is going to have to be executed, right? But also factors like the complexity around the automation, what you're automating, how you're automating, right? Is the API level, is it the UI level, et cetera, right? There's a lot of factors to consider, right? We've got tools and techniques, right, that we use to help our customers make that choice on what to automate. So that's definitely something to consider. But then also, once again, you become more mature and you've got hundreds, if not thousands of test automations in place, right? The maintainability becomes really a big factor and something that you need to think about around that investment in automation, right? And the returns you're looking to drive from it. So from an AI perspective, right, as we've talked about, as David Colwell talked about before, right, AI has been around for a while. More from a mainstream testing use of AI perspective, right, around automated test creation, the test maintenance, right? There's a couple of key capabilities that we've seen in production and more mainstream now around speeding up the development of automated tests. So typically with AI-enabled test automation, you can speed up the development and reduce the effort for developing new automation by 20% or more. But again, I think more important, once you get more mature and you have those hundreds, if not thousands of automations, the self-healing capabilities within AI-based test automation can reduce the maintenance on that by 40% or more. So if you think about it, that's huge savings that really can amp up the return on that automation investment overall. So that's one of the reasons we're really excited about AI. And then now with the introduction of large language models and Gen AI, it opens up the possibility for us to extend automation right to other pieces of the testing lifecycle, if I think of it that way. So things that even with test automation, right, things that have typically been done manually, right, like test creation, right, that's typically done early in the planning phase, right, or I should say test case creation, right, typically a manual process. Right now with Gen AI and large language models, we can feed the language models and feed the AI some of the acceptance criteria pointed at different user screens and other things that can automatically generate some of the test cases that we would then want to automate or even manually kind of test as well. Now, the important thing to point out, as David Colwell mentioned also, and the way we view AI, generative AI, is really more of an assistive technology overall. It does not completely replace the need for testing professionals and test engineers. It gets you maybe 40, 50, 60% of the way there. It saves a lot of time, it increases productivity, but still doesn't completely replace the need for people as part of your testing process. But would say though that, and also want to point out that going forward, like in the future, successful firms, right, will maximize the use of AI for intelligent augmentation of their testing workforce to drive those productivity gains that are needed to drive speed, cost savings, time savings overall from a testing perspective that's needed to keep up with the demands of business. So I think thinking about automation and the use of AI to help maximize the investment around automation is really important, and thinking about what the right things are to automate as well. So with that, Nadia, let me pass back to you and maybe ask you, do you have any other thoughts around the use of automation and testing and AI and in the banking industry in particular?
Oh, yes, sure. Thank you, Roger. But before I answer that question, I would like also to cheer to your point about the prioritization before you need to automate. Because speaking about the example I have just mentioned, that we have implemented for our clients, that's exactly where we started to define the strategy. Because for achieving the highest optimized level of coverage, you need to understand where the business priorities lay, and that's why end-to-end testing and coverage for business scenarios rather than isolated platforms is very important, because you need to understand which scenarios from business perspective are the most important and they're working, and automate them as a first priority rather than just having the target of automating everything everywhere and being late with that. So that's very important, and that's the approach that we used for our client. Returning to the question around AI and automation for banking, I think that AI, and especially generative AI, is an extremely promising technology. Myself, I'm very excited for that, because that would ultimately transform the tools and testing activities, because we would be able, as a testing professionals, to streamline some of the most mundane tasks and leave some of the data analysis that is impossible to be done with the means of 1 or 2 test engineers that you have on a project. This could be like somehow delegated to AI, and for the testing professionals to be able to focus on the risk analysis and coverage, and also to start implementing and moving to quality engineering approach, which from my perspective is the future of testing. It's like participating in the product engineering from quality perspective rather than simply validating the end product and finding issues there. Usage of automation and AI would allow us to contribute to this product design, to bring our knowledge and expertise to help to build a better quality product overall, instead of being just the gatekeepers and annoying guys who are pointing out the issues where it's almost too late to fix them. But also, as we were talking throughout the course of this hour, we actually need to be extremely cautious and not overly excited about this technology, because we need to watch how the technology and especially regulation for it develops, and see what we can do to bring on the most benefits to the testing space with the new tools without disturbing the client flows and client risks at the same time. Yeah, I guess that's what I think of the AI usage for testing. And maybe someone else has any other questions. I'd like to pass over back to Nav for the question and answer part.
Thank you very much indeed, Nadia and Roger. That's been really, really insightful, and really good to know the case study and use cases, specifically the Asia Bank one. There's already been some interest. Nadia, I'll be touching base with you offline. Someone has got in touch to really find out more about how we work on that. So really, thank you for your efforts. And Roger, thanks for waking up so early for this as well. So completely the other side of the world. Now, I am opening up the question and answer session. So there's been a question that's come in. And this may be a question which I'm going to go one by one to each of the panelists, because I think it's viable for both Tricentis and for DXC technology. So the question over here is, what AI tools have the panel implemented or used? And what would be the advice for using it? What would be the best practice for getting started with AI? How to introduce it in a controlled way to an organization so that it's managed properly in terms of systems and structure? Thank you for the question. Who wants to have a go first? So I think we'll have a mixed answer from both Tricentis and DXC. So please feel free to answer the question.
Hey, I'm happy to start on that one if you want, Nav, and then others can kind of weigh in. And it's a good question. It's a very good question. So from a DXC perspective, right, in this testing services that we provide for our customers, a couple of thoughts. We are, in general, product and partner agnostic, right? We work with a lot of different technology providers because we've got a very diverse client base and they have different standards, different tools they use. So in general, we look for the tools and the products that provide the most value. But I'll often say we've got a point of view, on some of the tools out in the market, some of the best tools out in the market, and Tricentis is one of our major partners when it comes to test automation, right? They've got a very good product set and set of tools. So often as we're looking and looking to explore and use more AI within our solutions for our customers, and again, I think of it traditional use of AI in testing, right? And now what the new possibilities are that are opened up with Gen AI and large language models. But traditionally, we've relied heavily on our commercial partner product tools. So tools like Tosca with the AI features that have, natural language, other capabilities kind of built in that help us develop tests a lot faster, automated tests, I should say. Analytics, right, that are in Q-Test, right, the reporting platform that help us, I mentioned earlier, right, the importance of picking the right things to automate, and that can give us good insights into what are the things we want to automate versus maybe this makes more sense to do manually. But to me, the key is the self-healing features, right, that are in Tosca as well, which have tremendous benefits. So traditionally, right, we focused on working with our commercial technology partners, but now with new generative AI capabilities like the things from OpenAI, et cetera, we're looking at and are leveraging some of those within some of our own accelerator tools, right, to do things like automated test creation, right, by being able to kind of feed some acceptance criteria and other things, right, into the large language, the open models, right, and get some of the information back to assist our test engineers, right? So we're going out beyond just the commercial tools, but also experimenting some ourselves with some of our own tools and accelerators. And I think the key is our approach has been experimentation, right? As Nadia talked about, as David talked about, right? It's really important that we responsibly use, especially like the open technologies and the large language models like OpenAI, right? So we're very cautious, right, in terms of our experimentation as we're building and we're prototyping to protect DXC and our customers' information, right, regarding those tools. And then as we look to see the benefits, right, associated with them, and we want to productionize those, right, then making sure we put mechanisms in place, right, as we productize those, right, to kind of secure that information overall. So what we've seen with the newer AI capabilities is a lot of experimentation by our customers, sometimes us jointly with their customers, but by our test engineering teams as well, using some of those other services. But still, we work very closely with our commercial partners like Tricentis as well on the exciting capabilities they've got coming out in the roadmaps.
Thank you, Roger. And thanks, Angela Martland from Leeds Building Society for this question. David Caldwell, any thoughts from Tricentis?
I'm both the right and the very wrong person to answer that question, because if you ask what AI tools have I played with or implemented, the answer is probably almost all of them. I've invented a few myself. We've built them into our products, and we use our own products internally quite extensively. So apart from saying, well, obviously, which products do I recommend? Hey, the ones that I build, like no surprises there. But I give you some advice on using AI in powered tools within your organizations. So there are some forms of AI that don't need any access to the cloud, things that you can use and deploy completely on-premise and inside, things like risk analytics platforms, or things that will focus your impact and tell you what are the most impacted things that will help with the change. There's self-healing capabilities which don't require external access. And this is very important when you're looking at gaining some of those benefits from artificial intelligence while not really having to worry about the regulatory problem of, where's my data going, et cetera, because like it's not going anywhere. But you do gain a lot more power once you can connect with the broader ecosystem. And within this spectrum, what you really need to do is look at how that tool uses your data. So within Tricentis, we're very clear on where your data goes, how it lives, how long it lives for, where it's trained, and where it ends up after that. And we do have a lot of banks using our cloud-based AI platforms because we're so transparent, like SOC 2, ISO, you name it, we've got it. However, if you want to start playing with your own tooling, and this is something that we've also seen our banking and finance customers experimenting with, especially considering things like OpenAI and Google Palm are very easy. You can just jump in and you're off into the races. Move with caution. They do have fairly good data privacy policies now, but they're not ironclad. A great example would be when our legal team read through the one from OpenAI and it set its legal liability limit to $100. They picked it up and threw it right out the window, because that's them saying, hey, if your data is leaked, then our limitation of liability is $100, and that doesn't pass muster for any bank. So you can play with those tools. You can do quite a lot of really cool stuff with them, but be very cautious and make sure you engage your legal and compliance teams early on before you start experimenting, because you may find that after you've started experimenting, it's too late to get that data back. So 3 categories: tools that don't need the cloud, tools that need the cloud and are clear about data transparency, and ones that are a little bit more opaque. And that's really the degree of caution that you should exercise when engaging with artificial intelligence.
Thank you, David Caldwell, for that. Nadia, David Rimmer, anything you want to add?
Nothing to add from what Roger have mentioned already around the partners and the tools that we are using. I just want to highlight also that we are very open to implementing any type of tools that the client has whitelisted and wants to try to run in their environment. So we have professionals who have different versatile skill sets and are able to support this type of implementation, but we always tread within the limits that the client set up for us according to their own compliance policies. Because when we are talking about regulation for AI, it's not only about the general regulations that exist globally, but also specific rules per each bank and per each organization that they have internally, and they could differ from client to client, and we strictly follow them during this type of implementations.
So my sort of thoughts on that were sort of twofold. I think that the first is that AI is obviously about learning, but it's also about, it's not just about models, it's about an organization learning and learning progressively how to use AI. And it's so important to bring the various different stakeholders, with you in an AI program. The compliance people, the legal people, the business people, they will not necessarily understand very much about how and where AI can be used and the issues are. So one needs to look at it, as I say, as a learning program for the organization as a whole to understand where and how to use AI. So that would be a real learning point for me. And I think the other one is that if you look at most AI programs, they're still stuck in the lab. And that's just the reality. It's a hand crank world, a lot of data science, and somehow one needs to have a path to get out of the lab and to productionize and automate and operate at scale. And one does need to start thinking about that relatively early on. You need to have that view of how you're going to actually implement at scale, have some of the maintainability that Roger was talking about. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of pet projects that don't actually make a business impact. So not saying you have to have all that sorted out from day one, but you really do need to start thinking about that path to industrialization and operationalization, because that's when you're going to get the benefits.
Great. Cool. Thank you, David. Thank you, panelists. And great question, Angela Martland from Leeds Building Society. Thank you very much. I've got another question over here. And again, this would be, we've got 8 minutes, so this would be again for panelists. I know you mentioned Asia Bank earlier, Nadia, but any practical example that we have? It's a very simple question. I'm sure there's a more complicated answer than that, because quite a few, I know we've delved on a couple of examples, but is there anything else the panelists want to add? And I believe it may not be just primarily from DXC or Tricentis, but anything unusual or exciting that you've seen as a trend that may come up in the next, specifically as we are approaching the end of the year, any kind of trend that we might be seeing in the next 12 months at least.
So was the question some practical examples of the use of AI in this, or? Yeah, oh, okay. So I'll open up with a practical example of AI needing to be tested. That is something that is we found to be quite an underserved area within the implementation industry at the moment. I think as Dave Rimmer mentioned, AI does tend to get a little bit stuck in the lab, and the leading cause of AI getting stuck in the lab is incessant iteration, because you're dealing in the world of imprecision. You don't have a solid answer for a solid question. And so the question is, well, how do I test this thing when there's not a set of rules that I can look at the conditions and make sure that I've got all the paths tested? What do I need to do to be able to test it? And it's compounded by the fact that there's new types of testing that you need to do. Like we had to learn throughout 2023 terms like prompt hacking and context overflows, where you can, basically SQL inject the AI and get it to spit out all kinds of secrets to you. There's in fact games being developed in this thread. And this is probably one of the largest demands that we get from our customers is, can you help us, put into place practices and put into place technologies that will help us test our artificial intelligence? And we do this internally as well. And the comforting answer to it is, a lot of the techniques for testing artificial intelligence are techniques that testers are already well aware of. You've got functional tests that are regression in nature. It should continue to respond similarly over time. You've got exploratory security testing, which is now called prompt hacking. You've got performance testing, which is still called performance testing. You've got positive and negative scenarios. And above all, the amount of testing that you do is driven by business risk, the same way it is today. A chatbot that's talking to internals probably doesn't need a lot of testing. A chatbot that's talking to customers really does. So this is an emerging thing. We've got many, many customers that are moving quite aggressively to pull things out of the lab by implementing solid AI testing practices. And you get the benefit here that if you're a tester and you're using AI to do your testing, you start to sort of absorb a lot of this knowledge about how AI works and what its limitations are that you can then use to test products that are built on top of AI. So it's beneficial from both sides.
We have been observing a lot of examples of clients reaching out to us existing clients reaching out to us to do a proof of concept to evaluate the AI features of some of the tools that are already in use. Because right now, with the testing space, a lot of large providers of solutions are adding the AI features into their existing tools. And our clients are asking us to do the proof of concept, like to check out how these features work and what could be the implications. But everyone in the industry is, as we have mentioned already today, very cautious on how they proceed with it. And it rarely goes beyond the POC because no one wants to implement something that would be critical for their day-to-day activities that could be then prohibited from usage due to some new regulation for the space. So this is the risk that people are not really willing to take at this moment, but everyone is interested in the technology and how it enables the existing tools, the tools that are already purchased and licensed within the organization, how they could become better by having the AI features added to them.
And I think that approach is important. And you're right, we see a lot of interest with customers in starting small. And I think starting small with a small proof of concept or a pilot is a great way to start. In terms of, and what we've done for a few customers a little more practically is starting small with some use cases around regression testing, things that could be repeated frequently. So you're going to get big return right on the benefits of AI, but starting small, but with some complex real world end-to-end use cases as well, like Nadia talked about earlier. But doing the proof of concept both to validate the technology, right, but also to validate the benefits that you're expecting to receive from the technology, and then to capture and use that data to build the business case. Again, thinking like automation and the use of AI as an investment, build the business case up front for the further scaling and rollout of that as well. I think that's something really important as you're starting out and doing a POC also.
I mean, metrics are really, really important here. I mean, you've got to have metrics, to obviously to assess the performance of a model, to understand if that model performance is drifting. You need your metrics for a business case, and all of that stuff you need just as much or more in AI as in any program, and that's the foundations of what should be coming out of your POC. is, what are the business metrics? What's the performance of the model? What's the cost difference, etc., that's making?
Super. Thank you very much indeed for all your answers, and thank you to Alex Matsuta for asking that question. We've unfortunately run out of time. I wish we had nearly half-day workshop for this topic. It's a very insightful, hot topic at the moment within financial services and banking capital markets. But I just want to extend my thanks again to Nadia, to David Rimmer, David Colwell, and also Roger Smith for taking the time out of your busy schedules, and also again to the audience as well for making time to join in and listen to us. The recording will be available. I will be sending that across sometime later today. Again, thank you for your time, and hopefully we can have another session with Tricentis on testing with AI, another topic on a similar route within financial services and banking capital markets. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Thank you all.